The pagan Epic of Gilgamesh says that long ago, a great flood destroyed humanity. In the wake of its destruction, humanity began anew. But instead of mourning their wickedness, the fledgling people of Uruk rose their fists once more to heaven and produced a man named Gilgamesh.
Who can say, like Gilgamesh, I am king, whose name from the day of his birth was called Gilgamesh. 2/3 of him is God, 1/3 of him is human. The great goddess Ururu designed the model for his body. She prepared his form, beautiful, handsomest of men, perfect.
This man-god took upon himself divinity and flaunted his unnaturally giant becoming form as proof of his goodness. He declared himself perfect and supernaturally revealed secrets from the times of men before the flood, times he should not have been able to know about.
He saw the secret, discovered the hidden. He brought information of the time before the flood.
This secret knowledge withheld from humanity was promised as their savior. In Gilgamesh, the rebellious people saw everything they wanted. Gilgamesh began to rebuild their cities and step by step started molding them back into their pre-flood state. The keeper of secret knowledge personified the implied promise of guiding the people to greatness. But one by one, the people discovered a return to their debauchery was not quite what they truly wanted.
Gilgamesh does not leave a son to his father. Gilgamesh does not leave a girl to her mother. The daughter of the warrior, the bride of the young man, the gods kept hearing their complaints, so the gods of the heavens implored the Lord of Uruk, Anu.
And Anu heard their pleas. This giant of a man was more than a man, for remember, Gilgamesh was a melding of God and man, 1/3 man, 2/3 God. No mortal could defeat his tyranny, so the gods brought forth a contender, one even less human than Gilgamesh's 1/3 human, a beast named Enkidu.
His whole body was shaggy with hair. He had a full head of hair like a woman. His locks billowed in profusion like Ashnan. He knew neither people nor settled living, but wore a garment like Samukan. He ate grasses with the gazelles and jostled in the watering hole with the animals. As with animals, his thirst was slaked with mere water.
Like Nebuchadnezzar when reduced to a wild beast, this creation of the gods exuded nothing more. Crazed, this beast proved a terror to mankind, and mankind called upon Gilgamesh to contest with this beast. The giant Gilgamesh, however, had other plans. He sought to transform this monster through sexual relation with a harlot, the son of a god going into the daughter of men. This beast, Enkidu, became overcome with lust at the sight of the harlot, and upon sexual intercourse, his entire nature proved transformed to become like Gilgamesh, mighty in stature, taller than other men, and ultimately, friend of the very one he was supposed to compete with, for he had become a giant like Gilgamesh. Together, now united, the two sons of gods decide to set their sights on higher things, taking down the very god who had brought the flood. No longer would their rebellion be nuanced, slowly corrupting humankind with forbidden knowledge not meant for them, remolding society into a mirror of pre-flood civilization, and drawing men to worship and admiration of themselves. Now, they would bring the fight directly to the god responsible for the flood itself, a god named Humbaba. Upon hearing this, the human elders warned Gilgamesh.
Humbaba's roar is a flood. His mouth is fire, his breath, death. He can hear any rustling in his forest 100 leagues away. Who would go down into his forest? Who among even the Gigi gods can confront him?
Even the pantheon of gods the people worshipped were known to be nothing compared to the might of Humbaba. And yet Gilgamesh set his face against the god who had brought the flood upon the earth, declaring,
I must face fighting such as I have not known, and I must travel on a road that I do not know, until the time that I can go and return, until I reach the cedar forest, until I kill Humbaba the Terrible. If I kill Humbaba and cut his cedar, let there be rejoicing all over the land, and I will erect a monument of victory before you.
With claims of victory upon his lips, Gilgamesh set out. However, his nights were beset with tidings of doom. Despite this, like Pharaoh, his rebel heart hardened even further, and he discarded the warnings in his depraved hubris, saying thus,
Humbaba, against whom we rage, we will triumph over him.
Finally, he came face to face with the mighty god Humbaba. His friend Enkidu, that giant hybrid, gave a rallying cry to Gilgamesh.
You have splashed in blood, so you need not fear death. Go berserk, like a dervish, fall into a frenzy.
In the frenzied bloodlust of demons, they slew Humbaba. The foul giant Gilgamesh tore off the giant's head and displayed it for all as a trophy, a direct inversion of David's biblical victory over the evil giant he faced. Instead of the power of God through David triumphing as David held the giant's head high, the tale goes that the giant held this god's head high. The giant had raged against the God who brought the flood, and won in his rebellion. Here our story closes. But before the curtains fall, two things are of particular note. Firstly, the biblical inversions do not end with the giant Goliath. During the fight against the god, this giant god-man Gilgamesh had plucked up the tallest cedar from Humbaba's forest. This particular cedar's top had reached into heaven itself, with Enkidu commenting that its top is thrust up to the sky, creating a monument to their victory over the god who had brought about the flood. Gilgamesh and Enkidu took hold of that which pierced the firmament of heaven, fashioned it into a portal, and placed it in a pagan sanctuary as their trophy to the pagan gods. Enkidu proclaimed,
To the house of Enlil in Nippur, the Euphrates shall bear it, and the sanctuary of Nippur rejoice.
Eerily reminiscent of the rebellion at Babel, many Christians have concluded, based on the biblical account of the tower, that it too was to serve as a sort of portal temple to commune with the demonic forces. It is notable that nearly every strain of witchcraft can find its way back to that tower, shaking a fist at the true God who brought the flood upon the earth, while they teach their members to commune across dimensions with evil spirits. Finally, it must also be understood that just like in the biblical account of Babel, even the pagan Epic of Gilgamesh records that the apparent victory of this giant was only that, apparent and temporary. The pagan Epic of Gilgamesh reports that the gods cannot, in the long run at least, be spat upon. The sexually made giant beast Enkidu was soon after slain, and slowly, Gilgamesh began to fear death itself. Not even the might of the giant could forestall death, and so Gilgamesh suddenly faded into obscurity with none to recognize him. It was as if something drastic had occurred to rip him apart from the rest of humanity, something the biblical account of Babel explains more clearly. As such, the forbidden pre-flood knowledge he had brought faded with him, and the apparent victory of the vile Gilgamesh was vanquished. Just when evil had seemed omnipotent, it was cast down back to earth, for from dust we are made, and to dust we shall return. Do I believe the accounts of the ancients? Absolutely. That is not to say I believe them to be 100% accurate, only the Bible is that, but I am not a driveling materialist who writes off those who came before as mere superstitious simpletons, with myself being on a hitherto unique pedestal of wisdom. That would be Gnosticism. That would be the height of arrogance. I do not write Muhammad off as being delusional and foolish. Rather, a passing understanding of demonology is necessary to equip us as we live in this fallen world and are confronted with the schemes of the devil, such as Islam. The Epic of Gilgamesh alludes to biblical events like the flood, and quite possibly Babel itself. This is not a coincidence. The Bible speaks of a part man, part god who lived shortly after the flood and oversaw the construction of the Tower of Babel. His name was Nimrod.
Genesis 10, 8-12 states, Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech, and Akkad and Calneh. in the land of Shinar. From that land he went forth into Assyria and built Nineveh and Rehoboth, and Calah and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah, that is, the great city.
In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we hear he presided over a city called Uruk. The Bible tells of a city called Erech. The very name Nimrod means, "let us rebel." He is credited with the founding of Babel in the land of Shinar, but like Gilgamesh, he fades into obscurity after the portal tower is completed and the languages of the earth confused. A Christian theologian, quoting a Jewish legend, said thus:
The great success that attended all of Nimrod's undertakings produced a sinister effect. Men no longer trusted in God, but rather in their own prowess and ability, an attitude to which Nimrod tried to convert the whole world.
Likewise, a Jewish Targum explains,
He was powerful in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord, for he was a hunter of the sons of men. And he said to them, Depart from the judgment of the Lord and adhere to the judgment of Nimrod. Therefore, it is said, as Nimrod the strong one, strong in hunting and in wickedness before the Lord.
The language used in Genesis to describe Nimrod's hunting was not that of one who hunts game for his family, but of one who hunts men, who devours blood, for the life is in the blood. Nimrod stood before the Lord God Yahweh, not as a righteous man like Noah, but as a rebellious man-hunter who oversaw the construction of a tower against the Almighty. Got Questions, a popular apologetics website, has this to say about Nimrod.
From examination of the biblical texts and other ancient documents, it is clear that Nimrod was one of these mighty men from before the flood, also called Nephilim. And there is also evidence that he was much larger than the average man, a giant, so to speak.
They conclude this because of the verbiage used to describe this giant. Genesis calls him a mighty one, using the exact same Hebrew phrase and verbiage from Genesis 6.
Genesis 6, 1-4. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown.
These Nimrods, men of renown, these mighty men, were seen as detestable in God's eyes and credited with the reason for the flood. It gives them a title, Nephilim, and calls them the unholy offspring between the sons of God and the daughters of men. This phrase, sons of God, is distinct in the Hebrew scriptures. In Hebrew, it is a phrase, Bene Ha-Elohim. If you know anything about the word Elohim, it is that mere humans are not called that. Spirits, even God himself, is given that title. In fact, God is called the Elohim, the ultimate, but not mere men. In fact, the same phrase, used only 5 times in the scriptures, is used in Job to describe Satan's appearance before the throne room of God.
Job 1:6. Now there was a day when the Bene Ha-Elohim, sons of God, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them.
Later in the same book, God himself appears to Job and sheds more light on the identity of these beings, of whom Satan is one.
Job 38, 4-7 says, Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who set its measurements, since you know? Or who stretched the line on it? Or what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the Bene Ha-Elohim, sons of God, shouted for joy.
Genesis 1 tells us that man was created last, certainly after the foundation of the earth. In conclusion, the identity of these Bene Ha-Elohim cannot be humans. Day 4 of creation tells of the existence of light bearers, or luminaries. God tells Job these morning stars sang. But God, in Ezekiel 28, tells of what befell one morning star in particular.
Verses 13-17 state, You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. On the day that you were created, they were prepared. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you, and you sinned. Therefore I have cast you as profane from the mountain of God, and I have destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I put you before kings that they may see you.
This morning star, this cherub, fell from grace and took on the form of the serpent, eventually leading away, as Revelation 12:4 tells us, a third of the stars of heaven. The followers of this evil cherub, often called Satan in the Bible, fell with him, and Genesis 6 informs us that in Noah's day, some went into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those who were called Nephilim, the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. If this sounds strange to you, it's only because, like the driveling materialist, we are ignorant of our history. Nearly every pagan culture contains reports of these evil god-men, these mighty fallen ones. The Greeks called the human offspring of their gods demigods, and even had names for some, like Hercules. The Romans did likewise and found their pantheon in such agreement with the Greeks that they adopted it wholesale. The Christian church itself has historically affirmed this view in no uncertain language. Jude reports confidently about these angels, these luminaries. He writes in his epistle,
Jude 1:6, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he, being God, has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day.
Peter wrote that Christ himself proclaimed his victory over these fallen angels while in the grave. He says in his first epistle,
1 Peter 3:18-20, for Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through the water.
Jesus told us that the last days would be like the days of Noah. He said,
Matthew 24:37, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah.
Granted, the context focuses on how unexpected the flood was and how unexpected the return of Christ will be to the world. But Revelation 9 further informs us of the fate of the spirits now in prison from the days of Noah. John wrote that he saw
Revelation 9:1-4 and 11-12. Then the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key of the bottomless pit was given to him. He opened the bottomless pit, and smoke went up out of the pit, the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke came locusts upon the earth, and power was given to them, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were told not to hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They had hair like the hair of the woman, and teeth were like the teeth of lions. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in the Greek he has the name of Apollyon, meaning destroyer. The first woe is past. Behold, 2 woes are still coming after these things.
The church fathers, too, speak of this. For instance, a Christian Latin poet of the early church named Commodianus said,
Then the highest uttered his judgment against them being the angels, and from their seed giants are said to have been born.
Likewise, ante-Nicene or before Nicaea church father named Clement said,
But from their unhallowed intercourse, spurious men sprang, much greater in stature than ordinary men, whom they afterwards called giants. Not those dragon-footed giants who waged war against God, as those blasphemous myths of the Greeks do sing, but wild in manners and greater than men in size, inasmuch as they were sprung of angels, yet less than angels, as they were born of women.
Finally, this goes back very, very early, all the way to Athenagoras, an ante-Nicene church father who lived shortly after John the Apostle. the very writer of Revelation.
Some free agents, being angels, you will observe, such as they were created by God, continued in those things for which God had made and over which he had ordained them. But some outraged both the constitution of their nature and the government entrusted to them, namely, this ruler of matter and its various forms, and others of those who were placed about this first firmament. You know that we say nothing without witness, but state the things which have been declared by the prophets. These fell into impure love of virgins, and were subjugated by the flesh, and he became negligent and wicked in the management of the things entrusted to him. Of these lovers of virgins, therefore, were begotten those who are called giants. And if something has been said by the poets, too, about the giants, be not surprised at this. Worldly wisdom and divine differ as much from each other as truth and plausibility. The one is of heaven and the other of earth. And indeed, according to the prince of matter, we know we oft speak lies that look like truths.
It is notable that the oldest testimony from the early church fathers view this as something as sure and firm to rely upon. He says, we say nothing without witnesses, and he references the prophets as those witnesses. He sees it as unambiguous, and he notes that just because pagan pantheons and cultures have similar ideas, that does not discredit it. Worldly wisdom and divine differ as much from each other as truth and plausibility. The one is of heaven and the other of earth. This understanding has been carried forth to modern times. The conservative pastor John MacArthur states in his study Bible,
the sons of God, identified elsewhere almost exclusively as angels, in Job 1:6, 2:1, 38:7, saw and took wives of the human race. This produced an unnatural union which violated the God-ordained order of human marriage and procreation, Genesis 2:24. Some have argued that the sons of God were the sons of Seth, who cohabitated with the daughters of Cain. Others suggest they were perhaps human kings wanting to build harems, but the passage puts strong emphasis on the angelic versus human contrast. The New Testament places this account in sequence with other Genesis events and identifies it as involving fallen angels who indwelt men.
Olger's Bible Dictionary likewise agrees in its definition of Nephilim.
Nephilim, see giant. The Nephilim are considered by many as giant demigods, the unnatural offspring of daughters of men, aka mortal women, in cohabitation with sons of God, aka angels. This utterly unnatural union violates God's created orders of being, with such a shocking abnormality as to necessitate the worldwide judgment of the flood.
This flood was a divine preservation of humanity, not an extinguishing of it. Satan had been told in the Garden of Eden when God cursed him that God would,
Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise him on the heel.
So immediately he, Satan, began to attempt the corruption of the woman's seed. God, in miraculous act of preservation, saved Noah and his family while bringing death to all the twisted half-men. In fact, Genesis 6:9 tells us that Noah was complete and perfect, a word choice that has hints of genetic purity to it. Noah was not half man, half demon. He was fully man, complete and preserved. Eventually, God narrowed the seed of the woman down to the one who would come through Abraham, and Satan soon began to attempt the same tactic once more in the land of Canaan. The men of Sodom sought to have sexual relations with the angels who came to Abraham's nephew Lot.
Genesis 19:4-5 tells us, before they laid down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them.
Not only was this a despicable attempt to engage in sodomy, from whence the word derives its name, but Jude clarifies the nature of this desire.
Jude 1:6-7 clarifies, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as these indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh, are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire.
In response, God once again acted to preserve the human race. He utterly destroyed Sodom with fire. Yet again, when the descendants of Abraham attempt to enter the land of Canaan, we see that Satan had once again tried this tactic.
Numbers 13, 30 through 33. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us." So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone, in spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight."
In response, God ended up demanding the wholesale death and destruction of the Canaanites. God continually acted throughout the entire Old Testament to preserve humanity and keep his promise of the coming Messiah, the one who would crush Satan's head. 2 Samuel informs us that Goliath himself was among the Nephilim.
2 Samuel 21, 15 through 22. Now when the Philistines were at war again with Israel, David went down and his servant with him. And as they fought against the Philistines, David became weary. Then Ishbi-Benob, who was among the descendants of the giant, the weight of whose spear was 300 shekels of bronze in weight, was girded with a new sword, and he intended to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, helped him and struck the Philistine and killed him. Then the men of David swore to him, saying, "You shall not go out again with us to battle, so that you do not extinguish the lamp of Israel." Now it came about after this that there was war again with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai, the Hushathite, struck down Saph, who was among the descendants of the giant. There was war with the Philistines again at Gob, and Elhanan, the son of Jer-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. There was war at Gath again, where there was a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number, and he also had been born to the giant. When he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants.
Goliath, similarly, the Goliath that we think of when we think of Goliath, whom David killed, was related by extension to these giants. Goliath and all his perverted family too were utterly slain by David and his men. Eventually, God would use the Assyrians to fully wipe out the Philistines in completion. Revelation 12 summarizes it this way.
Revelation 12, 4b through 5. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth he might devour her child. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne.
Satan's schemes have failed, and such unnatural evil as Nimrod, the real Gilgamesh, will not befall this earth as they did in the days before Christ's coming until the pit is unlocked. We ought to know the times we are living in, and we ought to know what to do when the skeptic or Muslim compares the genocide of the Canaanites to the jihad of Islam. They're not the same. One sought to preserve humanity. The other sought to brutally extinguish members of the human race. Theology matters. May we answer the skeptic well.